Greetings, peoples of the interwebs. Jake here. So, it has been quite some time since I last did a video like this, and that's mostly because I'm terrible with technology, and for the longest time, anytime I tried to record a video using my webcam, there was a lot of interference with my mic, and it kind of sounded like this weird metallic-y, static-y, fuzzy noise, and could not figure out how to fix that until I think recently. Could be wrong. This video is mostly a test to see how this goes. So, um, if this goes well, I'm probably just going to start doing videos like this more often, so that way I don't have to edit, because A, I'm really bad at editing, and two, I'm kind of lazy. And even though I have all the time in the world due to this whole quarantine thing, it still could be bothered. I would much rather do something like this that takes the least amount of editing possible. So, yeah. Speaking of this whole quarantine, so I've been out of work for about a month now. Yeah, I think 2 days ago was a whole month that I've been out of work, and so far I actually haven't minded it a whole lot. I mean, it kind of sucks having to draw unemployment, but so far I've yet to be bored out of my mind. I've been pretty productive with painting. Paint D&D minis, by the way. Don't know if I've ever mentioned that before in videos, but yeah. Also been playing a lot of D&D probably this last year and a half. Like I've been playing D&D for probably about 3 years, but more so like this last year and a half to like maybe 2 years. Really been getting into it, and for about a year I've been painting D&D minis. So that's been a lot of fun, and that's one thing that I've been doing with all this extra free time. Yeah, I don't know. I might post some of my mini paintings on Twitter, so follow me on there. Make my Twitter useful so I can actually be more productive on there. And speaking of productive, been doing a lot of writing, and have actually been more active here on the channel here recently with uploading updates on the book that I'm working on, The Priestess and the Paladin. And the last 4 videos that I've uploaded have actually been every week, thankfully. Where basically I've been kind of profiling the main characters of the book that I'm working on, and also showing off the amazing artwork that R. Mendoza has done for me. So feel free to check those out if you have not. But in the meantime, since, again, I guess if you have not watched any of those videos, the first draft is done, and I'm kind of waiting on a little bit more feedback before I go through the editing and revising process. So, let's see, I finished the first book the 1st of January, took about a week or 2 off, and then I started book 2, kind of in the meantime until, I start editing and revising. So, basically since, like, mid-January, we'll say, I started working on book 2, and have basically been working on it more or less a lot more consistently than book 1, actually. There are a lot of points in book 1 where I had a lot of writer's block, and since this is my first attempt at writing a book, there are a lot of times where it's difficult to like write scenes and dialogue between characters, but after, or at least I like to think that after a while I got better with the dialogue. It felt less, I guess it just came more natural to not only me, but also the conversations between the characters felt more natural, rather than me trying to kind of force exposition, because that's one thing that I tried to avoid, and I've still tried to avoid in book 2, is or trying to find that nice balance of exposition, just to kind of, one, world builds, but also to obviously inform the readers what's going on, without just like being super heavy-handed and kind of beating you over the head with like, here's the story, here's what's important. And I'm sure that like there are moments that where the exposition is a little heavy-handed, or maybe I kind of digressed a little too much on like some world building for what ultimately amounts to fun facts, just because they're not really important at all to the main story. That's just me kind of getting a little excited to kind of like, oh hey, this character's talking about this. This is a good opportunity to talk about this country or these people. And, that's probably stuff that I'll, or at least I would like to leave in, but depending on, what I hear back from other people. Because so far the people that have read the first draft of The Priestess and the Paladin have been very positive, which is great. Makes me feel really good. And me being the very neurotic person that I am, I'm always very, I guess, kind of always second guessing myself. So it's kind of nice that everyone so far has been very positive, even though I haven't gotten a whole lot of constructive criticism in terms of like, maybe change this, take that out, or add this in. So like, I haven't gotten a whole lot of that feedback yet. But just the general consensus so far from the 3 people that have read it has been positive. So again, that kind of encourages me to continue this. So that way the first book isn't just a one and done rough draft that sits there in the ether and never gets published. And again, like at this point, since I have like artwork done for the 4 main characters, and R.R. Mendoza is also doing the artwork for the cover of the book, at this point I'm kind of in too deep to not publish this thing, even if it is probably still going to be a little bit. Hopefully, it won't take too long for the editing and revising process. But again, this is the first time I've written a book, so I don't know. But right now I'm still aiming for publishing it sometime this year. It'll probably be later this year, maybe late summer to sometime in the fall. Because I also don't know, because even though I'm going to self-publish it, probably on like Amazon, and one would think I would have done a lot more research at this point on the whole self-publishing process. Haven't yet. Definitely something I'm going to look into. But as of right now, I have not done a whole lot of research or looking into the whole self-publishing process and how long that takes. But again, I'm kind of hoping and thinking it shouldn't be that hard or take too much time. So again, here's hoping that book 1 will be out sometime this year, and probably by the point that book 1 is out, book 2 will either be almost done, or again the rough draft will be done with book 2, which as of right now is just called The Priestess and the Paladin Volume 2. I may end up adding like a I don't actually know, the word eludes me. I want to say subtitle, but I don't think that's it. But yeah, maybe something to go along with like, The Priestess and the Paladin something. But yeah, so as right now it's just called, Volume 2, until I can come up with a better name, or maybe just leave it at Volume 2. I don't know. Haven't decided yet, but I've got plenty of time to decide. But yeah, so the process so far in Volume 2, I think I've gotten a little bit better with, again, kind of what I was saying earlier with the dialogue and describing things, because that's still, I think, one of my weaknesses with writing is describing some things. So I'm trying to get better with describing, whether it be characters or the setting, whether they're in like a city or a village or just kind of out in the open, if they're in a forest. Like, I don't think I'm going to go to like a Tolkien extent of detail where I go in chapters on like the leaves of the forest, even though it's very admirable, and I respect that. But as big of a fan as I am of Lord of the Rings, sometimes reading the books can be a task, because it's kind of like, cool, love the detail, I appreciate it, but like let's get the ball rolling. Let's kind of get to the meat of this story. I don't need to know what every fiber of grass looks like, or the direction that it's blowing in the wind. So I don't think I'm ever gonna go into that amount of detail, even if I become a good enough writer to go that detailed, that's just a little much. So I'm still trying to find that nice balance of describing things while also leaving enough to the reader's imagination to kind of paint their own picture of, what these characters looks like, or what this city the characters are in looks like, and all that stuff. So normally I'm not a big wine person, kind of digressing here, but I have found I tend to gravitate towards Moscatos, which is a type of white wine. I don't know exactly what differentiates a Moscato from other white wines, because again, I've really only dipped my toes in the whole wine culture. I'm more of a beer guy, but yeah, Moscato's pretty good. And I was at my local Kroger wine and spirit shop and found that their bottle of wine along with a red Moscato, which is kind of like a not so dry red wine. I mean, this Moscato, so I guess technically it's still a white wine, maybe? I don't know. But anyways, found both of them for like $8. And again, I'm not a big wine person, but I was kind of just there and saw like this bottle here that I have. Yeah. Was like $2.80, and the other one was a slightly bigger bottle, and it was like $4 and something cents. So I was just like, hell yeah, I'm gonna buy 2 bottles of wine for like $8. That's a great deal. Even if I don't like these, I barely spent anything. But I have enjoyed them, so yeah, kind of. I guess that's another thing I've been doing in all my time off is trying different alcohols, and white wines, especially Moscatos, good stuff. And honestly, that's the beauty with wine. It's probably one of the only alcohols where even if it's dirt cheap, it's probably still going to taste good. Like, I've had cheap $5 wine from Rite Aid, I think it was. Great. Tastes like grape juice. But, it gets you drunk. It's fantastic. It's the only alcohol where I will buy cheap wine, or cheap version of it, because cheap beer, terrible. Cheap liquor, terrible. Cheap wine, great. Tastes just as good as the expensive stuff. But yeah, digressing. So yeah, I guess that's one thing that kind of going back to my previous point of, I feel like with book 2 so far, I've been doing better with again, character dialogue, the natural progression of kind of characters' growth, and again, just getting better, like just the writing process in general, seeing as how this is the second attempt at writing a book. Obviously, there's still a lot of stuff that I need to improve on, but I think overall I guess, me being the very neurotic person that I am, I'm always very overly critical and usually always second-guessing myself on a lot of the things that I do. So the fact that, like, I wrote even a rough draft of the book and don't absolutely hate it is progress for me. And again, so far, book 2 is coming along quite well. I don't hate it, so progress. And I'm actually really excited about book 2, because book 1 is, for the most part, a pretty self-contained story, and even though there is, like, and honestly, like, fun fact, book 1 was just supposed to be a short story, not even something that I intended to publish or even had considered publishing. It was just meant as a short story to basically help me improve as a writer. But then, as I was writing it, I grew to really like the characters, and it kind of just naturally snowballed in the best way possible to me being like, okay, A, I don't hate this. 2, I like where I'm going with this, and I like the characters, so let's keep going and see just what happens. So, even though, again, book 1 was just supposed to be a short story, and then, again, it just naturally kind of turned into a much larger story, and again, pretty much by the time that I knew this was becoming more than a short story, I kind of started to slowly lay down some foundation that like there's obviously a much larger world, and there's well probably more around the midpoint of book one is when I started to kind of lay the seeds and foundation for the kind of continue like that there could be more to these characters in terms of like another adventure. I guess more so than yeah, there could be more to some characters as well with their backstories and all that stuff. So I'll leave it as I'll leave it there for now. But again, so but even with kind of laying down some of the foundations for a sequel, I think it still overall is a pretty standalone story. Like even if I didn't write a sequel book, I think it could still be just a fun, just one-off fantasy story. So that's kind of getting back to book two. I think what I like a lot about writing book two so far is the fact that now I know that, or well, hoping that by the time book one comes out, people will enjoy it, even if it's a very small fan base, which is realistically kind of what I imagine. But again, even if it's only a few people, if even if I make like $5 off this thing, great. That's $5 I didn't have before, and the fact that I'm making any amount of money at all off of, off of a hobby is pretty cool. So, but yeah. So with book two, though, again, kind of, I guess, relying on people's interest in book one and that they want to read more. With book two, I think I'm gonna just again kind of gradually build the world out a little bit more, give a little bit more background information on some of the other. Sad thing is, I've not even been drinking that much, and I'm already getting tongue tied here. So maybe if I drink more, this will at least be more entertaining. But a little bit more background information on some of the other like characters, races, cultures that have already been established in book one. Giving a little bit more background information on them, along with more background information on some of the other, basically the world at large. Whether it be again new cultures, people that I didn't already mention in book one or hadn't introduced in book one. Like there's, I'll just say that like there's something with dwarves that I'm really looking forward to in book two, with kind of elaborating a little bit more on their culture, and that's another thing that I've kind of done a little bit of research in is I guess kind of like slowly building up the language of some of these different cultures, and because a lot of them I basically just I've essentially based off real life people, but we're not people. Cultures, I'd say, is the more accurate term. Most of book one takes place in this kingdom called Wallavia, and in this region called Harusha, which is essentially Eastern Europe, and Wallavia was inspired, I guess, by Slovakia, which is a country in Eastern Europe. And so that's kind of been a fun thing too. With as I'm writing out actually, as I was writing book one, there's a scene where the characters are just at a tavern, just kind of eating a meal. So that was kind of fun for me, just because I'm a history fan and I like to learn more about different cultures. I actually looked up traditional food in Slovakia, and so that was actually just fun fact for me, and just to kind of add to the I don't know, I guess realism of this world, because even though it's fantasy, a lot of it, one, as I mentioned, is based on real life people, cultures, and all that stuff. But also, I'm also trying to ground this world in reality enough, even though it's fantasy, with magic and dragons and all that stuff, I still want it to feel grounded in reality enough to where you still could believe some of the stuff could happen. Again, even in a fantasy setting. So that's actually another thing that I've done a lot of research on here lately is looking up, different medieval weapons and armor and battles and stuff like that. So that way I can kind of determine what weapons best suit different races and cultures and what would they be really good at. And kind of harkening back to what I was talking about with the dwarves in book 2. There's a big part later on in book 2. I'll go ahead and say that with dwarves. And so one thing that's been a lot of fun is kind of researching like what weapons would best suit dwarves in medieval combat. And in most typical fantasy settings, in fictional works, whether it be Lord of the Rings or even D&D, and well, I guess to a lesser extent of D&D, but I guess like your kind of more mainstream fantasy works, dwarves are often depicted wielding weapons like axes, hammers, maces, and stuff like that, which do make sense, especially if you're going with the fairly common attribute of dwarves having kind of being stronger than humans or other humanoids, whether it be again, humans, elves, gnomes, halflings, whatever. So they have that I guess extra strength. It actually does stand to reason that they would use weapons like an axe or a hammer, because one, those weapons were already good for humans in medieval warfare to help pierce armor, especially even in particular when knights would be using like full plate armor. Swords aren't really going to do anything unless you're going for some of the weak points, like say some of the seams in the plate armor, like the armpits, neck, or if you had like a knife or a dagger or something like that that could go through the eye sockets of like a full helmet. And so with dwarves, that does stand to reason. So to a degree, it makes sense that they would use those kind of weapons. But at the same time, since dwarves are much shorter than a lot of other humanoids like your elves and humans, or other fantasy races like orcs and all that stuff, although orcs don't exist in my fantasy world, at least as of yet. I don't know. I may add them in, but probably not. But more just an example. So your kind of standard fantasy races, dwarves are usually shorter than them, and so using weapons like axes, hammers, maces would actually put them at a disadvantage, because those weapons don't actually have as much reach as a sword, spears, and other kind of common medieval weapons. And so, and again, like it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of open to however you want your fantasy races and stuff like that to be. And again, like even in my fantasy world, like dwarves do use those weapons, but most of the time they're going to be using weapons that kind of help compensate for their lack of height and reach. Again, since they're shorter, that means they have less reach. So if they're facing, say, a human, and your average human, I think at around medieval times, was about between like 5'5", 5'7", or even like a modern. I think the modern average height for human males now is, I think, only like 5'9". So again, like whether it's the medieval standard or the modern standard, a dwarf is still at a disadvantage reach-wise, because if a human is using even just a standard-sized sword, which I think most swords, not a short sword or a long sword, just kind of your standard run-of-the-mill sword that your medieval person would be using, was probably around like 4 to 5 feet in length. So that's already almost the height of a dwarf, maybe even more if the sword is 5 feet. So that means even if the dwarf is stronger, all that human has to do is just kind of keep waving a sword around to keep that dwarf at bay. Unless, of course, the dwarf is like fully armored, then they're probably just going to take the hits, because unless that human, again, gets like a vital weak point in, say, if they're wearing like plate armor, yeah, they can take the hit. The sword's not going to do much aside from giving a few bruises. All I got to do is close in the distance, which again, that's where, if they are using an axe, if they close in that distance, then yeah, you're dead. Because they probably have enough strength to, even if you're wearing like full plate mail, they're probably gonna start opening you up like a can opener with their axe or hammer or war pick, which is essentially kind of like a hammer with like this spike at the end of it, and that's basically what it was used for. Is a medieval can opener. You just start hacking at a medieval knight in their full plate mail and start cracking them open. And so, me as a history fan, one, I just enjoy looking up that kind of stuff in general, but it does help with my whole writing process and world building process to just get a better idea of how these different fantasy races would fight. And so dwarves, being at a bit of a lack of, or disadvantage with, their height and reach, your standard infantry, so say like a dwarven infantry army, they're going to be using like spears, pole arms, halberds, anything that like with long range to help compensate their lack of reach. And if they're in like a shield wall with like spears, halberds, pole arms, and all that stuff, you're not really gonna be penetrating that shield wall anytime soon, unless you use like a cavalry charge. But even a cavalry charge is you're gonna suffer huge losses. And that, again, that's something I'm kind of working on applying, and I think I've even established some of these tactics more so in book 2, because I guess with book 2, since it's more, there will be more, I guess, minor spoiler, more larger scale battles, whereas the first one, it's more very small, like skirmishes between like, half a dozen characters fighting at a time. For the most part, there are a few, I think like 2 scenes really in the first book where there's like more than like 10 people fighting at a time. And that's more of just kind of background stuff happening, and so I didn't really put a whole lot of effort into the logistics of what weapons and armor they would be using and all that stuff. Whereas book 2, that's something that I wanted to, again, put a little bit more effort into, is the logistics of what these characters or races would be using in battle or even for traveling. Because obviously if you're in full plate mail, knights didn't travel long distances in plate mail. They would only suit up once they knew a battle was about to happen. To be fair, one of the characters, Varaxel Firescale, you can check out the video on him if you haven't not already. He actually does wear like basically full plate mail and does travel around in plate mail outside of like when he's in the cities and taverns and stuff like that. He kind of just wears like a pair of pants and tunic and all that stuff. So I'm probably taking some creative liberties with that character wearing plate mail pretty much all the time. And really the only thing that I could argue like why he does that and isn't just completely exhausted all the time is he's over 300 years old, and he comes from a military background where he's trained vigorously for much of his life in different using different weapons and wearing different armors. And again, I guess realistically, I don't know if that would make a huge impact, but that's at least what I'm going with, so deal with it. It is fancy. I will be taking some creative liberties. But I'm still, again, like I said, trying to ground it enough in reality. That being said, your average medieval knight was not just strutting about in full plate mail because it's super heavy, and even though they are a bit more mobile than what is sometimes depicted in mainstream movies or TV shows and I guess the media in general, where a knight in full plate mail is almost moving like a robot. That's actually not true. They're actually very, for the most part, very mobile. They're very, kind of like different parts of your suit of armor, so that way you could be as efficient as possible with moving around to fight, because obviously you want to be as efficient as possible to win the battle. But yeah, man, I'm glad I'm kind of just using this as a test, because I'm kind of all over the place here. But again, I guess that's another reason why I wanted to record this video, is kind of just a little bit of insight into the madness of my creative process, from, again, whether it be just in general writing, the whole writing process, or kind of diving down the rabbit hole of, like, realistically, what weapons would dwarves use, or what weapons would elves use? Which, elves using bows that makes sense, especially if you're kind of going by the standard trope with elves, is that they have very keen eyes and can see further and better than a lot of other races. So they're going to be more accurate. However, one interesting fact I guess technically it wouldn't be a fact, because dwarves don't exist in real life, but I'm going to call it a fact nonetheless, at least with my fantasy world. Fun fact, elves would be more accurate. So say, they can take your eye out from 200 feet away, but, again, doing research in medieval weapons and all that stuff, so your standard bow that most people would be using had a draw weight of about 75 pounds, and I think that's probably about standard for modern bows we use now, whether it be for, like competition stuff like you'd see in the Olympics, or I guess your archery team at your local school, or probably even hunting bows, the people that use those, it's probably around like 75 pounds. So that's not a whole lot of weight, but like when you take into consideration that like you have to use whatever your dominant arm is to pull back 75 pounds just to fire an arrow, it takes a bit of training to build up your muscle memory and just the physical strength to repeatedly, draw your arrows and fire them. And so with dwarves, on the other hand, since they have that extra leg up on strength compared to humans, elves, and some of the other races, they would actually have to train less. And again, this is the logic that I'm applying, because I feel like it is grounded in reality. So even if they're using, say, like a medieval warbow, which I think the average medieval warbow had a draw weight of like 120 pounds, somewhere around there. So obviously, like, they weren't used as much as your standard bow or crossbow or anything like that, because obviously it took a lot of like years of training to one, be able to use those, but to use those efficiently. So with dwarves, though, since they have that little extra strength, obviously they would still have to train for several years to use them efficiently, but it would take less. So I don't actually know, like, I guess the average amount of time it would take to train for, say, a human, but I guess, for example, we'll just say that, like, maybe it takes, like, 2 years of training for a human. I don't know, 2 years seems long. But I don't know, we'll stick with it. Again, this is just as an example. So we'll say that, like, your average human takes, like, 2 years to properly wield a warbow in battle, to, knock arrows and shoot them off repeatedly in a battlefield. Takes 2 years of training to use those efficiently. So dwarves have a little extra strength, so we'll say that, like, it maybe takes half the time. It takes them, like, say, a year to, learn how to use those efficiently. Dwarves also have longer lifespans. So in my fantasy world, dwarves live up to around 500 years. And so, if they're going to come of age later than humans, I guess if you equate their lives, math. I don't know math. But yeah, so I guess by the point that they come of age to go off to war and all that stuff, they would still have so many more years of practice to use weapons like a warbow or something like that that requires more strength. So they don't even have to necessarily be as accurate as an elf. All they gotta do is hit their target, and their target's gonna get, like, just knocked flat on their ass. Even if it's not a fatal blow, they at least incapacitate their opponent for maybe the whole battle, or even if it's just for, like, say, a few minutes. That's one less knight charging at the dwarvish ranks, or that's one less archer they got to worry about, or whatever. So again, that's another thing that I've tried to apply to my fantasy worlds. And again, some of this stuff may not even come into play in, who knows, maybe even like the first 2 books of The Priest and the Paladin. This is just stuff for me to kind of keep in mind for future stories, because this is a vast world that I've created, and I have several ideas in mind for different stories and all that stuff. So and again, me just being a history fan, even if I didn't use this information, it's stuff I'd look up anyways, because I just find the stuff fascinating. So again, it's actually been a lot of fun to dive down the rabbit hole of all that stuff just as a history fan, but then essentially feeling like I'm back in school, kind of taking notes and be like, oh, okay, cool, medieval warbows, their draw weight's like 75 pounds or 125 or whatever. Like, I'll keep that in mind for this character or that race. So again, it kind of excites me and kind of motivates me to write more. And actually, there have been times where, because here lately, I actually have been having a little, not quite writer's block with book 2, but I guess having some difficulty writing scenes and some of the recent chapters, just where the characters are, but doing, watching videos on YouTube and just researching this stuff has kind of inspired me to just kind of force myself to sit down and write. So that way I can get to a certain scene where maybe I apply this kind of logic, where maybe one of the characters, is a dwarf and is using like a bow, and again, mentions kind of like, yeah, it may not be as accurate as like, an elf, but all I gotta do is hit my target and job done. So just little things like that, even if none of the readers ever like find this stuff interesting or anything like that, I'll at least be satisfied. So yeah, I guess it's just like a little bit of creative insight in what I've been up to here recently, and kind of some of the logic behind the writing process as well. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Still kind of a grueling process, because I guess there's another thing too with when I first started book 1 and kind of gotten a good groove. I was kind of feeling really cocky, and I was kind of like, I can write a chapter a week. Oh no, I could not. Or well, I guess I could have written like a chapter a week. It just would have been garbage. Not to say that my rough draft is not garbage, because it still very well could be. But again, I don't hate it, so that's, yeah. But I've kind of lost my train of thought. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. Huh. Could probably move on to something else then. So yeah, I get. Oh, okay, no, yeah. Now I remember the whole grueling process of writing, where again, it's getting a little cocky, and then, yeah, no, it turns out I can't write a chapter a week and feel confident about the chapter being good. So there are times in chapter 1 or book 1, and definitely book 2, again more so here recently, that I've kind of struggled to just progress the story forward with whether it be a certain chapter or a scene that I've had in mind that maybe I write it out a certain way, don't like it, and then kind of delete it, try to rewrite it, and that's a mess. Because a lot of times I'll write out a scene or line of dialogue or whatever, don't like it, delete it, try to write it out another way, still don't like it, delete it, and then I end up kind of going back to the first way that I wrote out that scene or line of dialogue because I'm like, actually, you know, I don't think it was better that way. So yeah, writing is as much of a pain in the ass that it has been. It's still very satisfying when I do finish a chapter, or very satisfying when I finish the book. Because my God, that I felt great. And it's also, I feel like it also has been very therapeutic for me because, again, I guess me just being the very neurotic person and always kind of having like self-doubts or kind of second-guessing myself, having accomplished writing the first book, even though it's still in its infancy with its rough draft. The fact that I wrote that and completed it without absolutely hating it and just scrapping it entirely, as I'm very prone to do, and have scrapped many stories that I've tried to write in this fantasy world, I'm very pleased with. And also, up until I started writing, like, it's actually probably been the happiest I've been in a long time, because I'm doing something that kind of just is fulfilling and satisfying to me, because I don't know, like, I guess I don't know. I guess the point in my life right now is I'm kind of working a job that I don't particularly like, not a whole lot of options that I find appealing is what I'll say, because I've got several options. A lot of options will pay better, but I feel like realistically I'll just be miserable working some of these other jobs, and so kind of had like several I guess like just kind of states of depression where I'm kind of just like aimlessly going about life, not really sure what I'm doing. But again, once I started writing, though, that's when I kind of, like, I really haven't had any, like, little spells of depression or anything like that since then. And even if it was, like, even if I did, it was very minor, and it was mostly just due to me getting frustrated that, like, maybe I couldn't get that scene right, and then I kind of just had to step away for a little bit and then come back to it, and then, bam. So yeah, it's actually been very therapeutic for me in the sense of I now feel more just, again, satisfied, more fulfilled with this whole writing process. And again, I've always been a creative person, so getting able to do creative stuff is very satisfying to me, whether it be, you know, writing or painting, all that stuff. And so I think that's probably another reason why I've been so locked into writing these last several months, is because it's just, I feel like it's kind of just been very, very good for me. So again, if I end up making money off of this thing, when it's, if anything has been more therapeutic for me than anything else, awesome. It's not something I expect to make a living off of, but best case scenario, I would love to just be able to make enough off of, like, my books to just work a part-time job and make enough off of, like, the books to live comfortably. You know, have a decent apartment, be able to, like, you know, pay off my car eventually and travel occasionally. That's really all I'll ask for. So if I can manage that, I'll be a happy man. But I think I've rambled enough. Probably too long, in fact. So I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping up this video, because, again, otherwise I'm just going to keep rambling and probably lose track of what I even started this video on about. I don't even think I think I just hit record because I wanted to, again, this was mostly a test, so I kind of just hit record, and it's a whatever podcast, so I was like, what the hell, why not? I'll hit record and see where this goes. So this might have gone well or horrible. I don't know. You be the judge. Comment below. Tell me what you think. I might do more of these, and maybe I'll drink more to make it more entertaining. Whether it'll probably be more chaotic, more rambly. But again, if it makes it more entertaining, then yeah, I'll ruin my liver for the sake of more more views, comments, and subscribers. So yeah, that wraps up this podcast, this solo podcast of just nonsensical gibberish. Hopefully you all have enjoyed, or at least stuck around for a little bit. I don't imagine many people stuck around to the very end. If you did, hats off to you. You poor fool. But yeah. Whether I'll do more of these or not, I don't know. But I'll at least be more, again, kind of continuously update videos on, lore videos on the fantasy world that I'm working on. Again, lore videos on the different races, mythologies, cultures, all that jazz. It's coming soon. I'm actually start with the dwarves. I might actually do a lore video on the dwarves first, then the religion, and then maybe another lore related video on them before I move on to like some of the other races and all that stuff. But that's probably what I'm gonna do, is kind of break it down to like race, their religion, maybe more about their culture or their I don't know, maybe like their military or something, and then kind of branch off from there. So those I imagine will do a lot better view-wise and just in general interest-wise. So stay tuned to the channel for more of those. And again, if you watch this for even 30 seconds, I applaud you. And if you stayed through to the very end, I wish I had a Patreon and enough subscribers and all that stuff to award you something, but I don't. So I will once more applaud you. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at IrishmanJake. I'm not very active on there, but if you tweet at me, I will become more active, and therefore, I guess more. Yeah, I'll just be more active, and maybe that'll motivate me to be more active here on the channel too. I don't know. Just tweet at me or don't. Like, comment, subscribe, all that typical stuff. And until next time, everyone. Cheers.